for the Mishneh Torah to replace the Gemara. Right? We're going to examine the evidence, and we're going to see what we come up with. So we start from the first page from the Hakdama, first page in your sources. So the second paragraph of the column that's on the page. In this time, the tsaros, the catastrophes have increased, and the time is pressing. And our wise men have lost their wisdom, and our understanding men have lost their understanding. Think also now even how the Talmud, the Rambam had said in the previous column, that people have difficulty understanding Gemara. Even in his day, the Shaktavatara is complex, and the language, also the Aramaic, was no longer the language of the Jews. So the Gaonim had composed short pirushim here and there. So now even these halachas and shuvas that the Gaonim sent out to explain parts of Talmud, even those shuvas of the Gaonim still leave us wondering. What was simple to them is not simple to us. Only very few in number understand, the Gemara even after, the Gaonim clarified what they clarified. And this is certainly true about the Gemara itself, be it the Bavli, be it the Yerushalmi, the Safra, the Sifrei, the Tosefta. What are the Safra and Sifrei? You know what that is? All right, these are Midrashay Halacha. There's Medrash Agada, there's Midrashay Halacha, like the making a Gzera Shava, Kal V'chomer. Often when you have your Tana Rabbanan in the Gemara and it brings a drasha, that's the type of material you have in the Safra. Safra is built around Vayikra. Sifrei is built around Bamidbar and Dvarim. It predates the Mishnah. I mean, the material is more ancient than the Mishnah, even though it may have been written down in the form we have it after the Mishnah. But it's basically that material that you say when the Tana Rabbanan and it says a drasha, it says that's a medrash halacha. That is a type of material that's in the mechilta, which is built around Shemos. Safra, it's built around Vayikra, and Sifrei is built around Bamidbar and Dvarim in a Malbim Chumash. You'll see it. He likes working with these midrash halacha because his agenda in the Malbim is to try to prove that the Torah Shabbat is legit, and that these drashas actually are should be made. There are little allusions in the pasuk say insert drasha here, so that's why he works with these midrash. That's where you'll find them. We'll go back to that. And the Tosefta, Tosefta are additions. Rabbi Chia wrote additional notes to the Mishnah. It's printed in the back of Gemara. So all these things, Sheitzichin Das Shachava V'Nefesh Chachama V'Zman Aruch V'Achadem Adech Anchocha B'Dvar Asurim Atorim V'Shar Torah Echid. Right, so now the Bavli, Yerushalmi, Safra, Sifrei, Tosefta, these things need wide knowledge and a wise soul, right, and a lot of time, and only after that you could figure out the halacha from all these books combined. I girded my loins, me, Moshe ben Maimon. So I relied on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I analyzed all these books. And I composed a book that includes everything that are in those books about what's mutter and what's also what's tamei, what's tar. And also I wrote it in a very easy language that's short and clear. Right, keep this in mind. I have arranged the entirety of Torah Sheba'al Peh in a manner that now it could be very well organized by anybody without any kashas, without any terutzim. Lo zomer b'kov zomer, not this man says this, man says that. El dvarim brurim, krovim v'nechonim, al pi ha-mishpar she'idbar mikol ha-chibur, ma'prushan and tzoyim, mimos v'shmeru v'ad aksha. Right, but rather, just a straightforward truth in its full clarity, very close to understanding, and this is these are the correct conclusions that come out from all these books. The Bavli, Yerushalmi, Safra, Sifrei, and Tosefta. Right, it says, well, it's everything from the time of Moshe until Rabbeinu Kosh. Vad, she called him Gluim Lakata Vagado, Bidin Kol Mitzvah, Bidin Kol Dram, Shetiklu Chaim V'Neviim, Kol Shal Kadei Sheloyed Adam Tzorech Lechibor Acher Ba'olam. B'dim B'dei. So, to sum it up, with my book, you don't need any other book. You don't need any other book, to know what the halacha is. This book is going to, encompass and hold together the entirety of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right? Not just, the Dinei Doraisa, but even the Durabonans, all the Takonas, all the Minhagim, all the Xeris, everything from Moshe Rabbeinu until the Gemara was composed, including whatever the Gaonim have explained to us after the Gemara was comprised. Therefore, I call this book Mishneh Torah. Because a person just reads Tanakh, beginning to end, and then he reads this book, and he knows from it Torah Sheba'al Peh ve'eno tzorech likros sefer acher beinehem. He does not have to read any other book. Whoa! What is this? Is there an ejector seat over there? Anyway, sounds pretty serious. Now, then he goes on to describe how he divided up into books and halachas and prokim. All right, so let's take a look on this Hasagas Harayvit very quickly. Yodeh mimeno. Right, so he thought he's doing something good to fix everything, and he's not fixing nothing. He abandoned the style of all the authors that came before him, because, I'll summarize outside, what the Rabbi goes on to say, they all brought rice. They brought shaktanim. So they made a case for why they passed it. And the Rambam just says, this is the halacha, this is the halacha. No, it doesn't bring out any opinions or why he says what he says. So why should I listen to him? Why should I listen to him? Doesn't make a case. I don't know where he's coming from or why, if I think otherwise, I should be mevatel my das to him. So that's one criticism of the Mishneh Torah that we'll find echoed in the other sources that we're going to look at. All right, but then there's the main issue over here. What did we just read? Sounds like.
This is the only book you need.
That's right. It's the only book you need. You don't need it. The Gemara's too hard. This is one book. He said it. That's why I called it Mishneh Torah. And we'll get back into analyzing that name a little bit more in a second. Just read Tanakh and read this book. You don't need any other book. Sounds pretty serious. All right, so let's take a look at some of his correspondence. So next, is a tshuva, a letter he wrote to one of his talmidim. Right, I have already attested to the book, the Mishneh Torah, that a person should not neglect. Don't rest until until you've fully encompassed, you've attained the whole book, the whole Mishneh Torah. Make this book your book. And teach the Mishneh Torah everywhere. It's to also, to spread its great benefit. Because the real intent for what the Talmud having been composed, and books other than the Talmud, it's already been lost. People are totally missing the boat with the way they deal with Gemara. The whole agenda of the learners are just to waste time on the Shakla V'Tarya and the Gemara, as if they must imagine, as if the prime intent in writing the Gemara was just to spar in argumentation. Nothing like that. But that was not the initial intent. All the Shakla V'Tarya and all the argumentation, that happened by happenstance, because of the need of the moment. Let's say there was a there was let's say, a Tosefta, right? And we didn't know we could read it this way, we could read it that way. So Mamar Shokol is equally weighted to be understood like this or understood like that. Upirish one guy proposed, this is how you understand it. Upirish Acher Bechuva, someone gave a different explanation. Each one had to show his proof and try to force that his interpretation is the correct one. Right? So the argumentation came up out of necessity because we had doubts. So a person proposed, I think you'll resolve it this way. So the guy asked, why are you so sure? So that's how the argumentation broke out. It was to clarify areas of doubt. Areas, gray areas, right? But that's not the prime objective of the Talmud. The prime objective, prime objective was to just make us know what we must do and what we have to be careful, and to not violate. Now, a guy like you understands it. So now we therefore wrote our book, the Mishneh Torah, to be consistent with the prime objective of the Gemara, of what do we have to do? How do we keep the mitzvahs? To make it easy to remember, and more than that, now that we clarify all the things that sometimes get lost in the shock of a Torah. Sometimes you forget what you're looking for, you don't get all the details. We zoom in directly on what the maskana is, what one has to do, and anyone else who wants to just engage himself with the sport of argumentation, we left it for him to do. And some people are even worse. They're not just sparring in argumentation. They think as if that's what the Talmud's all about, just posing arguments and bickering over day. All right, that's one letter. Sounds serious, right? No. Talmud's not being used correctly. Talmud's not being correctly understood. People are misusing it. We got to push the Mishneh Torah. That's what it sounds like, right? But, so let's read another letter. They wrote to a student, another student. By Beis, this student had immigrated from Egypt to Iraq. He was opening up a Beis Medrash in Baghdad. Here's a Shetilach Midrash Talmud Torah V'Halacha. I gave you Rishus to open up a Beis Medrash and teach Torah and also the Paskin. But of course, to constantly be, very diligent about knowing the Chibur, knowing the book. That's referring to the Mishneh Torah. But I'm afraid that you're going to start getting into fights with the people in Baghdad, and when they see you going in your own derech, you're just not going to, right? You're not going to be able to accomplish your agenda without fighting with people. Also, if you need to teach professionally, you are going to not, engage in your commerce. Now, don't become financially dependent on them because you're teaching all day, but rather making one coin from being a tailor or from being a carpenter or from being a weaver, right? Just one coin. That's better than even being the Rosh Galusa, you've heard the term? Exarch. I don't know exactly when the office was annulled, but it used to be basically Prince of the Jews in exile, the Rosh Galusa. Right, so it's better you should make one coin from being a tailor than having the authority and the office of Rosh Galus. Also, the more you deal with the community, the more they're going to pull you down, and the more to denigrate you. My advice is as follows: you should engage in commerce, learn medicine, and with that learn Torah true, in truth. And do not teach anything other than Hilchos Harav. What's Hilchos Harav? The Rif. Teach the Rif and compare it to the Chibur, to the Mishneh Torah. Now, if you see it, there's some machlokas between me and the Rif. In being ma'ayin in Gemara, people don't always draw the same conclusion. And go seek the source and why I might have said differently than Rif. Now, if you just spend your time learning a lot of Meforshim, you're wasting your time, and there's very little to be gained from it. Anything that you agree with me, let me know. Hashem should guide you, right, in the best possible way. So now, what's interesting over here is that he says, don't teach anything other than Rif. So he opens up the letter with, stick with the Mishneh Torah. He ends it off with stick with the Mishneh Torah. What do I need the Rif for? He says, sorry, and teach the Rif. Right, make sure to teach the Rif and, just compare the Rif with the Mishneh Torah. So there's something going on over here. All right, so now you don't have to do the whole Talmud, don't have to do all the Meforshim, but you should do Rif and you, all right. So now, in your next page, so we're in Hilchos Talmud Torah. Halacha Yud Aleph. The Rambam is passing the Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Lamed. V'chayv l'shalosh zman limidasoi. A person has to divide into thirds his learning. Shlish b'Torah shebechsav, 1/3 of Torah shebechsav. Shlish b'Torah sheba'al peh, 1/3 of Torah sheba'al peh. Right? V'shlish and 1/3 Yavin v'yaskil achris dar meshiso. A person should analyze and attain, the later things from other things, meaning figure out new halacha based on old halacha. Take the precedent, figure out new halacha, right? And a person should bring out new halachas based on old halachas. Then should compare things, compare and compress halachas. V'yovin b'midas sha'atorni dress and also a person is obligated to engage in the midas sha'atorni dreshes b'hem and make all the drushes. A person should engage in this act of, if I have this halacha, I want to find a source for it. Working backwards, reverse engineering with the midas sha'atorni dress b'hem and see how it may have come out of the psukim. And this is what I just described, the third of comparing, contrasting, figuring out new halacha based on old halacha, reverse engineering and figuring out the origins of halacha. That's called Gemara. Okay, I'm not going to, but you guys should read the next halacha also. The Rambam was against, taking money for learning. You should work for a living. Except, how about if you're like one of the Rambam's balabat, you read the next one in your own time, halacha yud beis. You come working 3 hours a day is enough, and then you learn 9 hours a day. 3 hours mikra, 3 hours, what he calls Torah sheba'al peh, which in our Gemara is called Mishneh, and 3 hours Talmud, and that's until you finish. And then when you finish, Yosim kol yamav b'Talmud. Spend all your days on Talmud. Next halacha. Right? Well, what I like is that every Jew should, everyone's got to learn 9 hours a day. Right? All right. Anyway, but here's the thing. So the Rambam here says you got to spend 1/3 of your time, and then the next halacha says so you do with all your time. Right? Once you you finish Tanakh, you finish Torah sheba'al peh, then Yosim kol yamav b'Talmud. So wait a minute, this contradicts the whole thing. Right? Now, when he describes albeit, he says this is what's called Gemara. So Gemara doesn't mean that which we call Gemara per se, but it means a certain type of learning. Right? Midas sha'atorni dreshes b'hem, comparing and contrasting halacha, right? Deriving new halacha from old halacha. You can't get that from the Mishneh Torah. How are you going to do your third? Everything the Rambam describes. How are you going to do it with the Mishneh Torah? That's called Gemara. And now that becomes your ikra learning once you've mastered the first 2/3. So you don't just do it 3 hours a day. Eventually you do it all day after, you have your Tanakh and your whole Torah sheba'al peh under your belt. It's very interesting, and we're going to come back to this, that he paraphrased this Gemara on the Kiddushin Daf Lamed. It says, Shlish Mikra, Shlish Mishnah, Shlish Talmud. He called it Shlish Tanakh, Shlish Torah sheba'al peh. And then shlish, he described it and said, Davar Zeh Nikra Gemara. Right? We're going to come back to that. So now we go to another letter that makes some order out of this all. And this was a long correspondence between him and a person called Rav Pinchas Hadayan. This is a very, very fundamental piece to just make order out of everything that we're reading. So we're in Os Beis. Oh, because also the Rambam's responding to Rav Pinchas Hadayan, must have sent him a whole laundry list of things that he doesn't like about the Rambam and about the Mishneh Torah. And he says, you also wrote as follows. Talmud. He asked the same question as the Ravid that we read, just with a little bit explanatory. He adds, another detail. You don't say, who you're quoting. You say it Allah. You didn't say it's from Rava. You didn't say it's from Abaye. We should forget about all the people that we were makabel from. Right? You don't want to. Everyone should be sourced, but also, you don't. We don't. And that's even if I'm someone who knows the Talmud, I could probably figure it out. Let alone the people who don't know the Talmud. Right? They don't know where you're coming from. They don't know what your rayas are. Right? And we heard that already from the Ravid. Right? So what does the Rambam respond? All right. All right. But for that, he continues with the laundry list of attack against him. Right? I never said, the Rambam says to him, I never said, Lotis asku lo b'gemara to not learn the Gemara or not learn the halachas Rav, the Rif, Rav Yitzchak. Oh, Zelaso. Hayodea Eid, he who knows all is my witness. Yeshli kamo shana v'chetzi, there's about a year and a half. Shalom du etzli chiburi, that in my yeshiva no one learned Mishneh Torah. Eloshnayim shel shanasim lamdu mitzasram, just 2 or 3 people learned some of the books of the Mishneh Torah. Rova talmidim ratzu lilmod halachas shel harav. Most of the talmidim want to learn the halachas of the Rif. V'limatio some compounding halachas. I taught them a few times the whole Rif. Some people also asked me, to learn Gemara, and I taught them whatever Masechtas they asked me to teach them. Also, did I ever command or did I ever think that people should burn all the books that were written before me because of my Mishneh Torah? I said openly in the beginning, in the introduction to the Mishneh Torah, it's only for some, for people who have shortness of spirit, meaning shortness of breath, shortness of strength. They cannot go to the depth of the Talmud. Right? As was very, very clear, it's for people that are not able to get the halacha of what's asr and what's mutter from the Talmud directly. Now you say, what about the Masorah? The Masorah will be lost. We won't know how to trace where the Masorah comes. Not true. Right? At the beginning of the Hakdama, I didn't assign that part, he goes through all the 40 generations. From Moshe Rabbeinu all the way down to Ravina and Ravashi. I spelled out the whole Masorah. I explained that everything in this book comes from these 40 generations of scholars. Right? And it goes on, and right. So he goes on to say, so now even though there are people that came before me that they wrote books, the Ram wasn't the first halacha sefer, but there was from like the halachas gedolos of Shimon Kaira Gaon, and things like that, right? The sefer halachas of Rav Yehuda Gaon, right? But to someone to write a book on Kol Torah Kula, no one did it since Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Since Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote the Mishnah, other than me, so even though I'm not the first guy to write halachas for him, right? I'm the first one to write a book that's all of halacha, right? No one did that since Rabbeinu HaKadosh. In a call, Gorm Sheshol is how raise it Temago in Midday along Shamar Shem Yodim and Biad Kol Shemishchiba Chiba Shel Lechavo Imo Blenech Likros Ploni Ploni. So now you what are you worried about? Right? Right? Is there any big service in just reading, and spouting names, right? But the main this upcoming paragraph is the pivotal paragraph. Vida. There's something that he wrote, the Rambam wrote, we actually didn't read it inside together, on that very first page, that Ram seems to mention something by the wayside. What's my style? My literary style is that of the Mishneh. The Hebrew of the Rambam is the Hebrew of the Mishneh, not the biblical Hebrew. Right? It's not the Aramaic and Talmud. He took, the Lashon HaMishneh, but he also took Derech HaMishneh. And this is very important. You did not pay attention to what I was writing when I say this book is modeled after the Mishneh. You do not understand the categorical difference between the approach of the Mishneh, the way the Mishneh works, and the way the Gemara works. Right? Okay, well, that we can skip. So I just want to skip a few lines down. He's quoting, some, about, a text that people, sent him. But I just want to skip out to a word. Va'ata is the last one line. Va'ata first. Listen, let me explain this all. Dal Red, listen, my Rebbe. Shakomi Shakosav Sefer. Ben b'divrei Torah, ben b'divrei Sharchos. Anyone who ever wrote a book, be it a Torah book, Divrei Torah, or a book about the other wisdoms, lahavdil. Ben Margoim Akadmonim, Ba'al Chachmas, Ben Min Aroifim, whether it's one of the early philosophers, whether it's a doctor. Echad Mishneh Drachim Wachas. There are two basic styles of writing. Old Derech Chibur, Old Derech Pirush. Either you're writing a book onto its own, or you're writing a commentary on another book. So either write the book itself or a commentary. It's either Derech Chibur or Derech Pirush. The Derech Chibur, now the Derech of Chibur, or of writing a book per se, Lahaskir Advarim Anachon Bavad, below Kusha, below Piruk, or below Shum Rabam. The way of Chibur, of writing a book per se, is just to say what's correct. No kashas, no terutzim, right? No rayas. Kamo she'asa Rabbeinu HaKodesh B'chibar Mishneh. You read Mishneh? There's no kashas and terutzim in Mishneh. There's no shakamatari in the Mishneh. Right? The Mishneh, doesn't even, very rarely says a drush. Very rarely. It's only what it quotes just says the facts. That's the way the Mishneh is constructed. Right? V'derech HaPirush, now the way of commentary is la'askir dvarim anachayim v'dvarim acherim sosan, to mention what's right, but also to mention things that may contradict that which is correct. V'akush is al kol davar piruk, and what there is to ask, what there is to answer. V'raya shezeh davar emes v'zeh sheker, and the proof that this is true and this is falsehood. O shezeh roi v'zeh roi, to show this is what's befitting to believe and this is what is not. V'zehu derech ha-Talmud, sha-Talmud pirush ha-Mishneh. This is the way of the Gemara, because the Gemara is not a chibur. The Gemara is a pirush. It's a pirush on the Mishneh. The Mishneh is the chibur. It just says the facts per se, the thing itself. Right? The Gemara now, which is a commentary, it's derech pirush, so it now explains why the Mishneh had to say this and couldn't have said otherwise. Right, and and this is what you might ask on the Mishnah, and that's why the question's not a question. Vani lo asiti pirush el chibur. The Mishneh Torah is a chibur, not a pirush. It's a book. It's not a commentary. Derech HaMishneh. Right? It's the derech of Shema Yom Mish Lo Yivin. I love Mishneh because of Shem Zachamim. B'dav Zazah Shi Raya Plumar Kach Kach. Ein Zerai Raya Lo Div Bnei Mamar Poni Kach Mamar Kach V'Zu Raya. So the Rambam of yours, he goes on to explain this. In the next paragraph also, even when you say, well, the Mishnah sometimes says Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Sometimes it's Stam Mishnahs, most of them, but sometimes Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Meir. The Mishnah in Edius, which the Rambam's paraphrasing, already addressed that. That why did Rebbe sometimes Hizkir Divrei Yochid Ben Amrubin? He mentions a Das Yochid. It's not like him anyway. It's him against all the other Chacham. Why did he mention? So the Mishnah explains because someone may have heard the Das of that Yochid, and thinks that ought to be the halacha. So Rebbe had to show, I know what you're quoting. I'm aware, and it's been negated. And that's any time a name or proof is ever, on the rare occasion that's mentioned in Mishnah, it's only a Rebbe said, I know that other, don't think I didn't know it. I know it, I saw it, and Allah is not that way. But plenty of times, Rebbe is no problem, totally covering up the evidence of where he got it from. Stam Lon Mishnah, over here in Shabbos, Stam Lon Mishnah, Rebbe Shimon by Muktzah, and Beitzah Stam Lon. Over here it's a sheet of Rebbe Shimon, but he writes as Stam Mishnah because he wants you to think it's the halacha, because that's the way he baskets. And in Beitzah, he went with the sheet of Rebbe Yehuda and Muktzah because by Yom Tov, he wants to be more machmir on Muktzah than on Shabbos. But so all those Mishnahs, which are all the sheet of Rebbe Yehuda, he wrote it Stam Mishnah because he doesn't want you to think it's a Das Yochid. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh only mentions names or any argumentation when it's absolutely necessary, because someone might have heard something. I know what you're talking about. I saw it, and I'm not choshesh for it. But as a rule, in derech chibur, you just say what's correct. In derech pirush, is when you get into all the reasons why it has to be this way, and it cannot be any other way. Right? As well as, the other things that we do in Talmud, which is to research the origins of halacha, which is not the agenda of the Mishnah, or figure out new halacha based on the precedents that are in the Mishnah. Right? So now all of a sudden, all the circles should begin closing. Everything should be clicking into place. Okay, the Rambam was terribly misunderstood. So take a look now. This is his Hakdama to his Sefer HaMitzvahs, where he writes that he had envisioned the Mishneh Torah project, and he took a detour to write the Sefer HaMitzvahs for reasons that he writes. But he's first envisioning the Mishneh Torah that he will write. Right, so he says like this. I'm going to. It's in the first column. Beneath the doodad. Hakdamas Rav Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon. First column. Right. So he writes. He had already written the Pirush HaMishnah, but doesn't have all halacha there. Right. So he says like this about the fifth line down, middle line. Risi gam ken shachaba chibur yichol kol yedor mishpatei ad shlo yadav chaser imeno. Right, I'm going to write a book that's going to have all the din in the Torah. Nothing's going to be misread. And I'm going to do as I'm accustomed to do. I'm not going to mention any machloiksin. I'm not going to mention any deos that were nidchad, any ideas that were rejected. I'm just going to do the halacha psuka. It's going to have, this is going to be the book that has all the dinim, be it what we need during Tangos, even for things that we need for when the base of Mikdash will be rebuilt. And I'm not going to mention by each one, who said which halacha, which Amora said, which Achlom Divrei Rabbi Ploni, as he envisioned, he subsequently did this, that at the beginning of the Hakdos Mishneh, he wrote out all the 40 generations, that I didn't make this all up. It all comes from this long line of 40 generations from Moshe Rabbeinu to Ravina Ravashi. And I'll say, everything that I'm writing in this book was all from Torah Sheba'al Peh, that was, from mouth to mouth, Ad Ezra, from back all the way back to Ezra, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. I also thought I'm not going to write it in the language of Nach, biblical Hebrew, because we don't know that very well anymore, and also not going to write in the Lashon of Talmud, etc. I'm going to make it in the Hebrew of the Mishnah, right? And he goes on to say, he's going to keep this very, very concise, going to have everything. And then he goes on to say in the next column, second paragraph, should I divide it up like the Mishnah? I mean, there'll be 6 major books, 6 storim, and I'll use the same division. Vagdi mashachia ve'iyun shayos roy ve'otzgana koluma ve'shetov shetiach halukas hashusam halach sochas makom mesechtas Mishnah. So I decided not to go with the order of the Mishnah. I want to make a more detailed order, but I'm going to make it halachas, similar to mesechtos. My halachas is like parallel to the Mishnah's mesechta. Halachas makom mesechtas Mishnah. Achomar hilchos sukkah lulav, hilchos sukkah, hilchos lulav, hilchos tefillin, hilchos tzitzis, hilchos. By the way, in the end, he didn't do it this way. This is how he's envisioning it. Like if you'll take a look at the Mishneh Torah, shofar, lulav, and sukkah are all one big. They're all one big, as it were, mesechta, right? But it's just what he's proposing. But there's going to be my halachas are like mesechtas, right? And I'm also going to break up the prakim into individual halachas like mishnayos, right? His agenda was to imitate the style, and not just the style, to be the new Mishnah. The new Mishnah. All right. You take a look at the next page, something very interesting, and then we'll re-examine the Rambam that we opened up with the new evidence. All right? But take a look at the Mishnah, the Gemara in Brachos. It's where the lines are still thin on top, but about 3 lines before they get wide. V'amar Ablevi bar Chomer Rav Shimon ben Lakish Maidich Siv Vegelchas Aluchas Even Hatorah V'Mitzvah Shekaz Avram. Pasuk in that Akash says to Moshe, I gave you the luchos, I gave you the Torah, and I gave you the mitzvah that I wrote to direct him. Luchos elu aser seres. Luchos in the pasuk is referring to aser sedibris. Torah zu mikra. Torah is mikra. Torah shebachsa. Chumash. Mitzvah zu Mishnah. Mitzvah refers to Mishnah. Asher kasafti that I wrote el nevim v'ksuvim lahorosam ze Gemara, to direct them. This is Gemara. Mlamet shekulam nitnu leMoshe Sinai. Everything is nitnu leMoshe mi Sinai. So now, first, the simple pshat. The simple pshat of what this Gemara means. Ravina Ravashi wrote the Gemara. Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote the Mishnah. Oh, that's not strictly true. Mishnayos were already being compiled. He just gave the final edit. Some say as early as the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, they started compiling Mishnayos as we have them. Just, and some parts of Mishnah, if you're sensitive, are more ancient than others. Right, but we won't get into that right now. But I want to know the simple pshat in this Gemara. It was all given to Moshe Sinai. Mishnah, Talmud, Nevi'im Ksum, we'll leave that aside for a second. That takes longer to explain. All right? What do we mean by that? Kulam Mitnul Moshe Sinai. Yeah, but what did it look like? Just say Torah Shabbat, Torah Shabbat. So no, we're not being specific. Mitzvah, so Mishnah. What concerns me is Mishnah and mitzvah and lahorosa. Mishnah, Talmud. Or let me throw it back at you. What do you think it sounded like? Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from the mountain. So it's just a whole bunch of Torah, a lot of like halachas Baal Peh, was like all sounded just like halacha Moshe Sinai, and then subsequently got arranged this way into the Mishnah and the Gemara. That's what it means that all this information originally came from there. Torah, it may have been not in the format that we know, but Torah Shebaal Peh breaks up into 2 types of learning. 2 types of learning, which those types of learning are called Mishnah and Talmud, which is what the Rambam explained to us in 2 places. The tshuva we just read from Pinchas Adayin, and even prior to that in Hilchos Talmud Torah, shlish. Right? Torah Shebaal Peh could take on 2 forms, both equally important, both equally valid. Right? There's the Mishnah form, where all that information compiles into a book in its own right, a law book, book of principles. And then the Torah Sheba'al Peh is nislabish, right? It takes on the cloak, the form of what we call Talmud. And the Rambam spelled that out for us both in that letter and in Hilchos Talmud Torah. The Midas Shator Nidreshes Beh, that technology of how to derive things from psukim, or reverse engineer and find sources for this halacha back in the pasuk. Through the drushes, we can reverse engineer. The technology to be medama milsa lemilsa, compare things, compare, contrast. That's called Talmud. Mishnah, the concept, right? Not necessarily Mishnah as it's written in front of us, right? And Gemara, that technology of the Midas Shator Nidreshes Beh and being medama milsa lemilsa and Yavin Achris Davar Mereshisa, that's Talmud, right? It's not like they made up Talmud later on. They made up the Midas Shator Nidreshes Beh or made up the derech of how to derive new halacha from old halacha. That's Misinai. It's not necessarily in the words that we have them. That was constantly reformatted over the generations. But it just means that Torah Sheba'al Peh, in its two forms of Mishnah and Talmud, that's as ancient as Matan Torah itself. Right? And the categorical difference is that in Mishnah is when Torah Sheba'al Peh is like a book in its own right. That's Mishnah. Talmud is now, as he says, the derech hapirush, but it involves other things, explaining where the halacha came from. So I'll find a drasha to reverse engineer it came out of pasuk, and also we can move forward, compare and contrast, and see what new halachas we can make based on the old precedents, which we've been doing ever since Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Even Moshe Rabbeinu himself engaged in that process. The Rambam writes in the Shorosh Hasheni of the Sefer HaMitzvahs. Okay, so now I neglected to assign this on receipts, but check me on this. I'm quoting from the from the very, very beginning of the Rambam's Hakdama to the Yad HaChazaka. The Rambam brings this pasuk: V'etchas luchos ha'even haTorah v'hamitzvah haTorah zu torsav v'hamitzvah zuhi pirusha v'hi hanikres Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right? So the Rambam took this Gemara, he paraphrased it. Torah, right? Torah Sheba'al Mitzvah zu pirusha dikra Torah Sheba'al Peh. What this Gemara calls, say, mitzvah alludes to. It wasn't that many words, guys. Mishnah. Right? In the Rambam's lexicon, Mishnah and Torah Sheba'al Peh are synonyms for the simple reason, right? Because Mishnah is how Torah Sheba'al Peh, it's in that format that Torah Sheba'al Peh is a book in its own right. In Talmud, it's drushes, right? So now we go back. Hilchos Talmud Torah. So we said the original lashon of the Gemara is, I'd like to give you the Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Lamed. Lo mishal shlab shnoisav, shlish b'mikra, shlish b'mishnah, shlish b'talmud. That's lashon Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Lamed. How did the Rambam paraphrase it in Hilchos Talmud Torah? You want to look it up? Right? What?
Can you say it's Gemara?
Oh, come on, we just did it a few minutes ago. What do you call it? The Hilchos Talmud Torah page, Parak Aleph, Halacha Yud Aleph. What does he say? All right. Shlish b'Torah shebechsav, shlish b'Torah sheba'al peh. Second, third is Torah sheba'al peh. The shlish is Yavin v'yasko v'achris Torah Shisa. So Rambam substitutes the term Mishnah for Torah Sheba'al Peh. In his lexicon, there's synonyms. Because Mishnah is a type of learning where that's Torah Sheba'al Peh per se. If you want to learn a book of Torah Sheba'al Peh, that's Mishnah. Then there's the other form of Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is Gemara, which is Derech Pirush, which also involves this technology of the drushes and comparing and contrasting. All right? All right? So, let's just clarify this a little bit. When you're learning Shulchan Aruch, just Mechaber Ramah, what are you learning? No kidding. You're learning Mishnah. We know our Chiyuv Talmud Torah is in thirds. I have to be spending my day learning 3/3. Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. So I want to know what. So if I'm learning, Megillah Esther, I'm learning Mikra, right? Right. If I'm learning Shulchan Aruch, like Mechaber Ramah, what am I learning? Mishnah. It's just the laws, and that's the tzura of Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's called Mishnah. And that would be true also if I'm learning Mishnah Brura. I'm not saying that's why I called it the book, but it's very apropos name, right? But if I'm learning the Bir Halacha, what am I learning? That's Talmud. The Bir Halacha, where he explains why it has to be this way and it can't be any other way. When you say we're learning Bir, so even though it's all the same book, but you're learning Mechaber Ramah, Mishnah Brura, you're learning Mishnah. When you're learning Bir Halacha, you're learning Talmud. You're being Mekayim that third. Right? So now we mentioned just what the heck, we're on the topic anyway. We mentioned before the Safra, the Sifrei, and the Mechilta, right, and the right, so which are not just as ancient as the Mishnah, right? Definitely not. May have actually been compiled later. The material itself is more ancient. The data recorded. But when I'm learning these books, Mechilta, Safra, Sifrei, what am I learning? No kidding, right? Because we said, what are they? These are the drushes. The stuff that the Mishnah left out, like the drushes, the drushes of the Mishnah, in the words around, the drushes that the Mishnah did not bring down, as the Rambam said, because the Mishnah's derech Hebrew, only so it's correct. So the original place where the drushes were stored, until in the Gemara it all got mixed together, right? Right, the original place was the Mechilta, Safra, Sifrei. Those books are built around Chumash. They're derech Pirush. They're built around Chumash, right? And they start saying the drushes on the Psukim, and these are all the drushes that words of Minana Emili, the Tana Rabbana. These are generally Mechilta, Safra, Sifrei, or parallel. That's that type of material. So you're learning Mechilta, Safra, Sifrei, even though it's as ancient as the Mishnah. You're not learning Mishnah. You're learning Talmud. You're learning Mishnah. It's the same thing. So now what we conclude, right? Now what we conclude is that the Rambam's Mishnah Torah is like the name sounds. It's the new Mishnah. It never came to supplant the Talmud, right? So now you understand why you need Rif, right? So he said, he told his son, and rather it's a Talmud that went to Baghdad, right? You got to learn Rif. Now the problem is we don't have Rif on all the Masechtas, right? The Chafetz Chaim fixed that. He wrote a book called Likutei Halachos, on Kotchim. Yeah, it's good stuff. Chafetz Chaim is really, he was a very big genius. He doesn't get enough credit for his genius, because his tzidkus kind of. So he wrote a riff. He wrote riff on all the Kotchim Gemaras, right? With a Pirush, with his own Rashi. It's amazing. Anyways, so the Rif didn't finish the job. The Chafetz Chaim came and finished the job. So of course, the Rambam doesn't disagree. You need the drushes, right? You need to compare, contrast halacha. That's not what you do with the Mishneh Torah. The Mishneh Torah is the Mishnah. The Mishneh Torah is the Mishnah, and it's just knowing the halacha l'maaseh, right? He never meant that you could be yotzei your whole chiyuv Talmud Torah with Mishneh Torah. You be yotzei your shlish Mishnah with the Mishneh Torah, right? Now, but here's an interesting halacha l'maaseh difference. Now, you stress, I'm the first guy to write a book on everything. Right? Let me ask something. You decide, I like Baba Kama. I'm learning Baba Kama for the rest of my life. This you guys do that, right?
7%.
Right?
We cover all 7%.
All 7. I'm kidding. Does it have an ejector function on it? Right? Listen, can a person decide that? Halacha l'maaseh. Tell me the din. I'm just sticking with Baba Khan for the rest of my life.
You did everything else before that?
You
did everything else before that?
Okay, very good. Very good. No, so no. You're on the right tracks. Speak it out.
You did me say what to do the first two.
Right, and very good. And here's the thing. And and I think this is true, and I think I heard this also from my Rebbe of Yaakov on Rosh Yeshiva Israel. Look, it depends. Shlish Mishnah, you have to learn the whole Torah Shebaal Peh. And that's what the Rambam wrote his book for. He could be Yotze. Shlish Mishnah, right, which is in the Rambam's lexicon, Torah Shebaal Peh, you have to learn everything. Now, you do not have the luxury to sit on one thing. You have to make sure before you die, you get it all done. Right? But the Shlish Talmud, which is in exercising in this exercise of researching the origins of halacha, new halacha. Who says I can't? When Rambam says the next halacha, Yosim Kol Yamav B'Talmud, as long as I remember, I don't forget, I could spend the rest of my life learning, Baba Kama. And that's also a very big, halachic difference between the Chiyuv Mishnah versus the Chiyuv Talmud. Chiyuv Mishnah, you have to learn everything. You have to master the entirety of Torah Shebaal Peh. You don't have to master it, in the style of Gemara. You master the information per se, the thing itself. And that's what the Rambam wrote the Mishneh Torah for, right? And so out Shlish Mishnah, you can't say, I'm just learning Mishnah's Bikurim for the rest of my life. You can't. You have to do, and now that you would not even really be Yotze, your Shlish Mishnah just with the Mishnahs of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, because you're not that smart to figure out everything that's encoded over there, so you have to learn the Mishneh Torah, right? But as far as your Shlish Talmud, do I have to say drushes on every single pasuk? Do I have to figure out every possible new halacha? I could engage in this type of learning. I don't see any reason why you can't be learning. It's Talmud, not Mishnah. Talmud, you're learning Baba Khan for the rest of your life. Right? So now let's go back and re-examine in new eyes, the Lashon of the Rambam in his Hakdama. So here. So remember, keep in mind, just try not to forget what we just learned a few minutes ago. Right? So he says like this. Right. We're going to start from, a few lines middle line. Ajte Torah Shebaal Peh Kula Stura B'Fia Kol Below Kusha Below Piruk. You have the entirety of Torah Shebaal Peh, which to the Rambam the words Torah Shebaal Peh Mishnah, right? Totally arranged with no kashas and no tirusim. Like the Mishnah, right? Right? So we can skip a few lines because he goes on. Klolo shel davar. Chibur. We saw that. That's what he said. Chibur versus Pirush. Chibur acher ba'olam. You won't need any other chibur, any other book per se, in the world. But din mideso in any halacha of din so chibur ze makabetz l'Torah Shebaal Peh kula Torah Shebaal Peh, right? Kula ima takas agaz v'agzer shnasi mosor shvar chibur hakamar k'mosh puru v'agarim hirem shechibur hakamar lefikach, and it's beautiful. Fikach karasi shem chibur ze Mishneh Torah. V'yisharim korah b'Torah shev'chsav tchila v'korah b'zeh v'yodea mimeno Torah Shebaal Peh kula. The second shlish, third Mishnah. Ve'eno tzarich likros sefer acher. You only need another book. Talmud is pirush, it's not a book. No, it's not a book per se. It's pirush, right? All right. So in short, right, the Mishneh Torah was created that you should learn to be Yotze your Shlish Mishnah, which is your Chiyuv, in the words of Ram, to know Torah Shebaal Peh. That is not, that is aside from your third, which is Gemara. But even by Gemara, going back to the second source we read in the Rambam, even by Gemara, the ikar of the Gemara is to focus on the drushes, where halacha originated from, and to focus on the final line of reasoning of new halacha based on old halacha. So who distills the Gemara that way? Please. You must have mentioned his name 50 times. The Rif. There's nothing wrong being Yotze your Chiyuv Talmud with the Rif. The Rambam was complaining about all the extraneous argumentation that was brought in by necessity, Why? Because the Talmud had to make a case for itself. You have to remember, the Talmud had to be ratified by all Am Yisrael. Came out of Bavel, spread, Mispashit B'chol Haratzos. The Talmud had to make a case for itself, so it cannot leave any. The Gemara couldn't say trust us. So it had to have all this extra argumentation of why you can't say otherwise. But the pure distilled Talmud that you're chayav to do, mitzad your third, is the origins of halacha and the comparing, contrasting. You forgot new halacha based on halacha, and that's what the Rif does. That's what he distills. So when you learn, so now it makes good sense. The Ram said, learn my book, also learn Rif. With my book, you're Yotzei Shlish Mishnah, and with the Rif, that is adequate to be Yotzei your Shlish Talmud. Any questions?
Why would he mention learning the actual Torah then? Is that dumb?
Excuse me?
He's only talking about the Shlish Mishnah. Why is he mentioning learning the actual Torah?
What? Mikra. It's one of your thirds.
I thought we said he's only talking about Shlish Mishnah.
No. The Mishneh Torah. The Mishneh Torah addresses.
He's asking why the Mishnah of the Rambam is telling you the Mishnah. Okay, but why would he tell you 1/3, not the
Yeah,
other?
why?
If he wants the whole Talmud Torah, it tells everything.
No.
Or was it?
Now that's what this book is about. Just people didn't understand his lexicon correctly. But he said it in Hilchos Talmud Torah. He told you Hilchos Talmud.
Why is
He mentioned in the Akdam, he said
Yes.
Mikra, so that's 1/3, and then he mentioned his book, that's 2/3.
Right.
So he mentioned 2/3, but not the last third.
That's right. You're not Yotze. You are not
Why?
Yotze. You are not Yotze Talmud. You're not Yotze Talmud by learning this book. That's correct.
But
Anybody?
you're Yotzei.
You're not Yotze. He never said that. He says you have to read Mikra and you have to read this book. There's questions.
Talmud.
Right? But here's the thing. But this is what we were saying. Talmud is not a book per se. It's an intellectual process. So now you could be Yotze with the Rif, right? And that's what he says. But this book, he explains what this book is for. Now, there's another thing. Right? Now, there's another thing. What?
I would agree with this, but is it Shad the Rambam had in mind, Big Chiddush, does the Rambam have in mind that there be a Talmud on his book? Okay, hot my book, that's the new, if I'm the new Mishnah, then you'll be ma'ayin into my book, and that's the new Talmud?
Yeah.
And that's why
No,
it's a big Chiddush to me. That's
Well, I mean, it's like he was more humble than that. He never imagined that, but that's indeed what happened. So case in point, if you're learning Rambam, we said you're learning Mishnah. If you're learning Kesef Mishnah, what are you learning? That's right, because he researches. Where did this come from? He traces back. He does reverse engineering. Achris Davar Merishiso. He starts reverse engineering. It came from the Gemara, and he says it for this and this reason. Kesef Mishnah is Talmud. Kesef Mishnah, Bialacha, Talmud. The Rambam per se is Mishnah. That is what this book is for. That's it. Yeah. Look, he wasn't lying when he said, I didn't say to burn all the other books. That's it. But this is the book of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al being the format of the Torah Sheba'al Peh being a book in its own right. We call Torah Sheba'al per se a book in its own right. That's what we call, in the words of Chazal, that was called Mishnah. This is the new Mishnah. Your chiyuv to know Kol HaTorah Kula is a chiyuv Mishnah. Your chiyuv iyun, right? You could choose Baba Khan for the rest of your life. But I'll tell you another nafka mina la'alacha, which might address your question, your concern. Right? All right, art school, that's not learning. Okay, whatever. I tell kids your age, there are two things you should never do. Never do drugs and never do art school. They both melt the mind. But it has to be said anywhere. Tell anybody that'll listen. Anyway, Shem Yirach. Right? But listen, there's, you could read Gemara, when you learn from a real Gemara Rashi, there's Gemara Rashi. There's Gemara Rashi Tosfos. Gemara Rashi Tosfos Rashba. Gemara Rashi Tosfos Rashba, Rambam Ktsos HaChoshen. What's my chiyuv Talmud? Answer is, and the Rambam actually says in the next halacha Yud Beis, you'll see there, where he said you could do Talmud for them. He says, Kafi Rochav Levavo. Talmud is relative to your ability. Not everyone's equally able to do this type of rigorous research. Chiyuv Mishnah is universal. me, you, everybody, we all have to know Kol Torah Kula, the information thereof. It's not like only for the smart guys or the guys with the Sitzfleisch. People still use that term. Yeah, right? Mishnah is universal. Everyone, and the Rambam writes about this in a few places, including in the Shemona Prakim, says no one should say he's stupid. Yeah, stupid. If you're not retarded, you could learn Kol Torah Kula. It would just take you longer, right? You could learn Kol Torah Kula. Now he's talking about Mishnah. Everyone can learn the whole Mishnah Torah, and that's exactly this is universal, and that's probably why he puts all the emphasis on this. This Mikra is universal. Everyone has to master the entirety of Tanakh, smart and stupid alike. Anyone who's chayiv in mitzvahs, right? If you're not shaitan, you're patur from mitzvahs, then you're chayiv in Talmud Torah. Everyone can do the entirety of Tanakh. Everyone can do the entirety of what's called Mishnah. What?
Even the smart have to learn Tanakh.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I say it.
Right. Those are universal. Talmud is relative to your ability. So now we should have emphasized this also. It's not just that Talmud, you could spend the rest of your life just engaged. I just want to learn Kiddushin, Be'iyun, and do Talmud on that. But there's another thing. The chi of Talmud on one guy is all, not the same as the other guy. It's not universal. One guy who's sharp, so he should be doing K'tzais HaChayshin, should be doing Nesivos, right? He should be doing that stuff if he's able to. The person who's not able to doesn't have to. Everyone, it's too much work, so just stick to, Rif, let's say, right? But in Mishnah, your Shlish Mishnah, the master, everyone's got to do it. So it doesn't go so smooth for you, so it's going to have to take, you're going to have to work harder, it's going to have to take a bit longer. So this, Ram puts on it, this Tanakh and Mishnah Torah is universal for every Jew. He writes it. It's for every Jew. Right? Talmud is now, that's relative to ability. That's another categorical difference between your Shlish Mishnah and your Shlish Talmud. Any other questions?
Yeah, the Rambam, the first letter we read from the Rambam says that the point of the Vikuach of the Talmud is really just to get to the halacha.
That was the Tachlis Rishona. Because
still Shlish Talmud talking to. The Rambam would say you can't make.
No. He said there's a lot of excessive argumentation in the Gemara. He's saying that was only b'mikra because we didn't know which way to go. But he says the Tachlis Rishona, right? The prime objective is to know the halacha. So there's aside from clarifying what the Mishnah actually said, trying to derive and what would therefore be the halacha in this question of the Bailahu, right? Right? But then there was a lot of side argumentation, which was out of necessity. But some people think that's the whole point of Gemara, just to sit and argue and, spar and svaris. Right? It says my book is fatal to the prime objective of getting to halacha. But the derech ha-Talmud of the argumentation is again to be like what the Rif does, streamline. This is the precedent. If you combine it with this, you get this psak. No, but there's a lot of excessive. That's why the Rif is so much shorter than the Gemara. He cut out all the argumentation that fell in by happenstance because of the need of the time. Again, let's not make light of it. They had to make sure the Talmud would be ratified when it would spread from Bavel to the rest of Klal Yisrael. So you can't say take it on faith. So they had to prove on each and every point why what we say is necessarily the only thing you could say, and you can't say otherwise. Right? But that was at that time. See it for that. Any questions? All right, thank you very much.